So this is a question I got from one of my viewers, and they want to know, should they go into web development or mobile development? So that's what we're gonna be getting into in today's video. So what's up guys, if you're new to the channel, my name is Kenny G, I'm an iOS engineer. In today's video, we're gonna go over, should you go into web development or mobile development? There's a big thing that some people want to know. They want to know which one should they go into. So in today's video, I'm gonna try to give you a good explanation on what I think maybe best based off of where you are currently as a developer. If you're new and you want to get into any type of development, whether it's mobile or web. So to kick things off, we're going to first start off with which has more jobs. So the one that has the most jobs at this current moment would be web development. I think that's pretty obvious for most people. If you go into web development, it can break down into many different parts. So you have a front-end developer or front-end engineer. I'm gonna use engineer and developer interchangeably, so just flow with me. So you got front-end, and you have back-end, and then outside of that, you also have full stack. So full stack just means that you're gonna be doing basically front-end and back-end at the same time. Now, if you're new to programming, you may wonder, which of the three should you kind of roll into? And out of the three, me personally, I would say if you're very, very new and you want to just get started, you're looking for a job quickly, front end may be the easiest to roll into. With front end development, for the most part, you're going to be mainly doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Now, with JavaScript, as of right now, most companies are now moving over to React. So you're probably going to be using React with your JavaScript in order to build out your layout as well as just your template or your website for the most part. HTML is pretty easy. CSS is also pretty easy to grasp. Doesn't take too long. I know back in the day, I used to use W3 Schools. I think that's a great site. I'll link it at the bottom below. When it comes to backend development is a little more difficult to learn just because with backend, you're going to need to know how to work with databases. And each company varies on what they look for as someone who works with databases. Some people use a NoSQL database. Some people use a SQL database. So if you go with a SQL database, you're probably going to be working with obviously SQL, Oracle, something of that nature. If you go with the NoSQL, you're probably going to be working with something like MongoDB or some of those other NoSQL databases. And if you're very new to this and you don't know anything about them, I would highly suggest just try to do your own research when it comes to databases. Databases can get very complicated. If you're brand new to programming, it's all over the place of what a company may be looking for someone who works with databases. But for the most part, outside of the databases on the back end, you're also going to be creating APIs, which will talk to the front end, which is why the front end engineer, or the front end developer rather, they're going to be taking those APIs that they get, parsing through the data, and then displaying it on the website so users can interact with the website. Again, like I said, front end is a little bit easier to work with. It's a little bit easier to get into, especially if you're brand new to programming. Back end, I would say go to back end after you've had a little bit of knowledge around front end. Back end to me is the area I like mostly. I don't really care for front end, but that's just me, personal opinion. Back end, I feel like is where most of the big, heavy logic is going to be pushed in. If you're a back end engineer, you probably understand what I'm meaning when I say that. Back end is where those data structures that most big tech companies push for you to know, they become pretty much relevant when it comes to back-end programming, because you're usually handling large sums of data, and the data does need to be massaged or parsed or cleaned up in a way where the front end can actually ingest that data and present it on the screen for the user. So that's pretty much what back-end. And when it comes to full stack, again, full stack just means that you're going to be doing front end as well as back end at the same time. So some companies, they rather have a full stack developer versus paying for two separate developers. They can just have one developer, they can handle both things at the same time. So when it comes down to mobile development does have a lot of jobs, but it does vary depending on which area of mobile development you decide to go into. So mobile development, you have native development versus non-native. So native development would be something as such as iOS development or Android development. Non-native would be something like Flutter, React Native, and so forth. For me, I'm a native developer. So I'm a senior native iOS engineer. And for me, I work for iOS, not so much Android, but I do know Android development as well. When it comes down to native, most companies are gonna probably be geared towards native development. You do have a few companies that are pushing more towards non-native programmers. So when it comes down to non-native development, non-native, you essentially can build the same application, but you only need one developer because there's usually one language that you're working with. Instead of with native development, you're going to need an iOS as well as an Android developer. So both developers would need to pretty much be writing to the same application, but just two different types of code. So you're going to have with iOS development, typically most companies are going to go with Swift or Objective-C. With Android, they're going to be going with Kotlin, or if not Kotlin, they're going to be going with Java. When it comes to non-native, it varies. Some companies go with, whatever they feel best. Some go with React Native. Some go with Flutter. They have their own special languages that they use for most of those non-native programs. React Native, I know for sure, use JavaScript. Flutter, I'm not 100% sure. I've never worked with it before. But the biggest pros and cons of the two, as far as non-native versus native. Native, you're going to get all those rich features that Apple as well as Android push to have in those applications, whereas non-native, in many cases, you're not going to get those, at least right out the box. And sometimes you have to wait for a certain period of time before you can use those. Now, between web versus mobile, which one is easier to learn? So for me, I would honestly say that web is probably a little bit more easier to learn just because of the fact it has front-end development. And front-end development, like I stated before, is much easier to get into. Ton of courses online for front-end developers, so you can learn the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, like I mentioned before. When it comes down to mobile development, it's a little bit harder to grasp. Mobile development isn't as difficult to me as backend, but it has some similarities to backend. Just because of the fact that when you work with mobile development, you're gonna be dealing with like threading and so forth. You do get some of those front-end features, such as building out UI. But again, with mobile development, there's a lot of logic because you have to think about that you're using a device with not a ton of memory, as well as the fact when it comes to mobile devices, in a lot of cases, you may be saving memory or storing that memory on the device. So you need to know how to work with those type of things, and it can be pretty difficult depending on where you are as a developer. Whereas front-end development, you don't need to worry so much about memory and all that. For the most part, you're just going to be taking the data that you get from the back end, parsing it, and then displaying on the front end for the user to interact with through CSS as well as HTML. So this is the big one. Which one is more fun to code? So I'm gonna be pretty biased on this. To me, I love iOS development simply because iOS gives you a mix between the two. So you get front end when you work with mobile development, as well as you get some of that back end features that you normally would work with on back end. So that's not to say that back end is exactly the same as mobile, because they're not the same by any means. But with mobile development, you do get to work with some of those same type of logic that you normally would work with back end, such as memory management, threading, just even the way you can architect your application. The way you can architect your application is somewhat similar sometimes as back-end development. Front end, you may not have this same type of architecture. Some applications do, but to me, with going with mobile development, there's a ton of logic in place that you need to work with. Whereas on front end, depending on what you're working with, in some applications, there is not as much logic. There is some, but not as crazy an amount as is needed to be as in mobile development, because again, you're working with a lot of chunks of data. So in iOS development, you can work with something similar to like databases. You can use like SQLite or Core Data. They're similar, but not exactly like a database. But you do get those interactions where you can like query off the data that you get back, that you save to the device and so forth. It's really, really great. Also with working with mobile development, there's a lot of other operations you can work with, such as downloading data once you get in connection with Wi-Fi, or downloading data on the back end when a user backgrounds the application and so forth. So a lot of those things are very, very similar to those complex things that you may need to know when you work with back-end development and so forth. So yeah, web development, front end is much, much easier to get into. It may seem much more fun to work with for some. For me, I just have a love for mobile development because I kind of get that mix between the two of back end as well as front end. So if I want to get deep into like some logic and theory, and maybe using a little bit of data structures here and there, you can definitely do that on mobile development. It's probably not the number one thing most people are geared towards, or most companies are geared towards. And it depends on the company you work for as well, because some companies, they do use heavy amounts of data, in their mobile applications. So those data structures do play a role, whereas in other companies, you're probably not ever going to use those data structures, so you never have to worry about them. And typically, in most cases, you shouldn't be doing all that in the mobile application. It typically should be handled on the back end and not on mobile. But some companies, depending on how much data they have and how they're using things, it varies. I've worked with applications where, yeah, some of them data structures were somewhat needed at times, and then on the other end, you're never going to be using them. So last thing is career longevity. Which one is going to give you the most years in software development? Honestly, I'm going to just say that they're both somewhat equal. As of right now, web development isn't going anywhere no time soon. Same thing with mobile development. In my personal opinion, mobile development isn't going to go anywhere at this current time. Now, unless something drastically changes, which, there's always a possibility that new tech is always coming out. Things may change. In my personal opinion, I think if anything, if mobile development changes, it'll be more so we'll still be using applications, but it may be like on glasses or something like that, which you're still going to need some type of code written for that. So I don't see mobile development going anywhere. People still use websites every single day, so web development also isn't going anywhere. But things can easily change over the course of time. So with that being said, for you, if you're new to programming, you may need to look deep into what you may like. Again, mobile development is great. Web development also is great. Either one you choose isn't bad. Both pay pretty much about the same, just being completely honest. Mobile development, you can easily make six figures. Web development, same thing, easily make six figures. Regardless if you're front end, back end, full stack, you can easily still clear six figures. Now you're not gonna get six figures right out the gate with either of the two, for the most part, I'll say. But you can easily get there in no time. And outside of that, I just want to thank you guys for watching the video. I hope this helps some of you. Again, if you're new, look deep into which one you like the most. Say play around with both ends. Play with mobile development a little bit, play with web development. See which one you like the most. And after that, make your decision. And I hope that helps you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. See you.